welcome. Today we are doing an hour-long cut-up lesson type thing. It is a waterfall. We're gonna teach you how to paint a waterfall. Howie specifically is going to teach you how to paint a waterfall. If you want the full version, you could head on over to Patreon and subscribe to hour-long paintings. You receive digital sketches, over 35 hour-long lessons. You get lots of Howie kisses if you subscribe to Patreon.
Apparently I've been replaced. This one really is a lot of fun. Please let me know if you'd like to see more waterfall paintings in the future and what alterations you'd like made to it. Would you like it in a jungle? Would you like it with more of a golden sky, a pink sky? How can I make this as interesting for you as I can? Also worth noting, I'm always here and ready to help. If you have any questions, leave them in the comment section down below. And now let's jump into today's hour-long cut-up lesson thing.
He's drooling all over me.
I'm going to begin here today with a larger square-headed brush. I'm going to dip the tip of it in some water to make sure it's nice and damp. This is going to condense the bristles, keep them nice and tight together. It's going to extend the wet life of my paint, and it's going to help me drag the paint farther along the canvas. Now I'm grabbing some titanium white, as you can see here. I'm going to grab a good amount of primary blue, mix that in. It's about an equal mixture at this point. I'm going to mix that up fairly well. Then I'm going to grab a fair bit of Mars Black, about half of what we used for the primary blue and the titanium white. And that's because it's a much more dominant color and it will quickly make a much darker pigment. And now I have a fairly desaturated dark blue, which I like a lot, but I'm going to throw a little bit more saturation into it by just throwing some more primary blue into it. And with that, I have a nice dark blue to start my sky with. So now I'm going to take this, going to come up right to where our moon is, going to start applying it to the entirety of our sky. I'm moving back and forth in horizontal lines, as you can see. I'm not too worried about covering up the mountains and hills in the background. And I'm using a fairly soft stroke with my brush. Now we're going to add some depth to it. And depth happens when light moves its way across a subject, like our sky. So I'm going to take a little bit of extra Mars Black, move that into our previous mixture, making it slightly darker, and I'm going to throw this on both sides of our canvas, and then I'm going to blend it inwards softly. And then if you'd like, you can mix in a little bit more of a brighter blue in the center where we're going to have our moon. So now find my moon, work in this brighter mixture, move it back and forth horizontally, occasionally moving into a crisscross, just to move the paint up and down the canvas as well. Now I'm going to take my smaller round-headed brush, I'm going to dip the tip of it in some water, as you can see here. I'm going to grab some pure titanium white paint, grab a hint of our primary blue, mix that in there, and then I'm going to go up and draw in my moon. Here, just working along the edges first, while the paint and the brush are still fairly damp. That's when you have the most control and you can make the most sharp, concise lines. So I work on the edges first, and then I work my way into the moon, as you can see here. Now we can keep going back to this time and time again, but at this point we have a lot of wet paint down on our canvas, and it's going to continuously blend, and we're never really going to get those stark pigments we want while it's this wet. Instead, it might just become a little muddy. So we actually need to take a break from this area, and we'll come back to it fairly shortly once it has had some time to dry. While we're waiting for this to dry, I'm going to take this smaller round-headed brush. I'm going to take some more titanium white, a hint more of our primary blue. I'm going to add a good amount of water to my brush and mixture, and then I'm going to create some clouds. I'm going to do that starting here closest to the sky, as these clouds are going to be the brightest. And then I'm going to work my way farther and farther away, allow that paint to dissipate on my brush, it'll become much more transparent and in turn darker because you'll see through it and it'll kind of optically blend with the dark night sky that we have in the background. I'm going to take a wet brush, no paint on it. I'm going to move in circular strokes with the bottom of our application and blend it downwards in a gradient. This is going to give it a lot of depth and make it feel like the light is hitting the edge of these clouds and working its way down. Going to do some of those horizontal clouds over on this side now. Make it a little bit more interesting on both. That way it balances itself out. Now, while I let my moon here dry, I'm going to switch to my smaller square-headed brush, dip the tip of it in some water, head over to my palette, grab some Mars Black paint, grab a good amount of our primary blue, and now just a hint of our titanium white. Here I'm trying to create a fairly dark blue mixture for the mountain in the background. I don't want it to be a pure black. I'm saving that more for our foreground here and our true silhouettes. Now I'm going to begin applying our mountain along the edge of my drawing. As you can see here, I'm using the smaller square-headed brush because it has this nice sharp tip. And then once I get a good amount of paint applied, I'm going to blend my paint downwards. I'm going to move on to the water that we have down here in the foreground. Now I'm going to switch to my larger square-headed brush. I'm going to dip the tip of it in some water. I'm going to head over here and I'm going to create a nice color for our water. I'm going to make it dark at first. We're going to start with our dark base layer, then we'll add some midtones and some highlights, and that's how we'll create depth. So I'm starting with some primary blue. I'm mixing in a little bit of Mars Black here, grabbing a hint of titanium white to thicken it. We want a pigment that's fairly similar to our sky, but maybe just a little bit darker. And once I have that, I'm going to take my old, or rather large square-headed brush, work that nice sharp line in the back, and then I'm going to work my way forward in the painting, as you can see here. I'm able to work around the sharp edge of this landmass fairly simply because this brush does have that nice sharp edge. I'm actually going to take a little bit of a break from the water. I'm going to let that dry. I'm going to switch over to our smaller round-headed brush and go back up to our moon yet again. So here I'm grabbing some titanium white, mixing in a hint of our primary blue, then yet again going to go along these edges, continue to create this nice, fairly defined line around it, and then work that pigment inwards. Also going to take a little bit of our titanium white, mix it in with that primary blue, and add a little bit more of a highlight to some of these clouds that we have here. They're a little bit seemingly closer to the moonlight. So we're going to do another layer. I'm going to take my larger square-headed brush, dip it in some water, grab yet again a good amount of our primary blue because I do want it to be nice and saturated. I'm going to grab some Mars Black. This time I'm going to grab a little bit more titanium white, as we know that really is a great thickener for this. I'm going to apply it on top of all of that water yet again. Doing it with the same application, I'm using horizontal strokes for this back area here. And then as we move more into the foreground, I'm working more on this angle. Now I'm going to take my medium-sized square-headed brush yet again, head back to my palette, grab some primary blue, some titanium white, mix up a nice brighter blue. Going to head underneath my moon, going to create some reflections, some light. And I'm doing that by applying the pigment right under the moon, and then I'm moving it to the left and to the right. Now I'm going to take some more titanium white, mix up a brighter mixture than we had before, head back into this nice little reflective area, create more of these nice bright highlights in the middle, lots of tapping, The more tapping you do as opposed to strokes, the more of the natural pigment you have on your brush that's going to show up on the canvas. When I make a stroke, it blends. When I make a tap, you get more of that natural white. Now that our moon is fully dry, we can take our smaller round-headed brush, dip it in some water, grab some titanium white paint, make it incredibly thin, like watercolors. Apply it along the edge, and then start working it out in a little bit of a round application like this. On a large scale, it looks like this, and then we're smaller, 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 till we're incredibly small. And this is going to give it a nice little movement to it. Make it feel really nice and interesting. Now while I have this brush, I'm going to take some Mars Black, hint of our primary blue, hint of our titanium white. Going to draw in this little island that we have, like that, and the trees that sit on top of it. I'm going to need very wet pigment for this. Very fine amount of paint on the brush. Starting with that middle branch, and then I'm tapping the branches and arms on the sides. Now, I still need to do all of the detail work in this water here, more so in the foreground, but before I do that, I want to work on the falling water here, because as it falls, we're going to cover up parts of this edge, and I know it's going to get messy. So I'm going to work on this first, and I'm going to do all of the real detail work on the foreground after that. So with that said, I'm now going to grab my larger square-headed brush. I'm going to dip the tip of it in some water. I'm going to head over to my palette, grab all of the primary blue that I have left here, put it in a darker spot here on my palette, grab some of our Mars Black, a little bit of titanium white, create a nice dark tone, as you can see. I'm going to apply that to the bottom of our waterfall, and then I'm going to blend it upwards. Now I have a nice sharp edge along the base. I have some streaks moving upwards, which is great for the waterfall. Now I'm going to clean my brush fairly well, head back over to my palette, grab some primary blue, a little bit of titanium white, not too much, mix those two together, and then back into that darker mixture. Now we should have a lighter version of our blue. I'm going to apply that to the top of the waterfall, and I'm going to blend down. And then I'm going to blend. And when I apply this, I'm dragging the blue down into that darker blue. Going to head back over to our palette, grab some more primary blue, Mars Black, good amount of titanium white, create that nice bright top. And I'm going to use a lot of primary blue in this because I want it to be nice and saturated. So now that I have this, I'm going to place it at the top, and I'm going to bring it down, just as we did before. Here I'm adding much more of our titanium white in this next application, working it along the edge of our waterfall. I'm making it very thin over on the edge to the left here, and much larger here in the middle. And I'm doing it with a tap, that way it doesn't do much of a blend. Now that we've given that some time to dry, we can go in and add some detail. I'm going to take my smaller round-headed brush, dip the tip of it in some water, grab a good amount of titanium white, a hint of primary blue, just to give it some added saturation and reflected color. And I'm going to take this, going to go to the most bright, well-lit area of the water that's going to be falling. Going to start creating some nice little pieces that are coming down. This is generally going to be the pieces that are falling off of little pieces of rock that are kind of protruding. We'll add a lot of highlight here in the center because that's really where we want the eye to be. Then I'm going to take that same pigment that we're using for our highlight. I'm going to tap on some highlights to the edge of our tree here. Just the side that's going to be receiving light from the moon. So the light from the moon is coming down this way. It's going to brighten up this side, doing some little tapping effects for the branches. And I'm occasionally doing a bit of a drag. And then I'll highlight the bottom of our little island here. Now I'm going to take my smaller square-headed brush, dip the tip of it in some water, grab some Mars black, hint of titanium white, and create some nice little rocks here in the foreground. This is going to layer over top some of our waves and some of our shimmering water. We're going to create lots of small rocks here, as well as a couple large ones. I'm using the smaller square-headed brush because it can create these nice sharp lines for these rocks, and because I can create larger ones if I want by applying the majority of the brush to the canvas, or very small ones if I just use the corner of my brush. There we go. Now we need to add some highlights to them to make them look realistic and interesting, to give them depth. So I'm going to take some titanium white, mix that in with some of our Mars black, and then I'll run that along the edges of the rocks that are going to be receiving light from the moon. I'm applying it to the tops, and then I'm blending it back a little bit. Sometimes I'm creating little shelves, as you can see here. There's a nice sharp top, and then there's this little black here, and then there's another sharp top, and then there's more black, and that's just the rock separating into different pieces and catching light in different ways. As the paintings progressed, I've decided that I actually don't want the larger tree and little landmass here in the foreground. I really like how vast and wide open it feels, and I feel like if I do that, it may kind of condense the piece a little bit too much, and I don't feel like we'd have enough dark imagery over here to kind of balance it out. So I'm not going to do that. Instead, I'm going to do some mist down here in the bottom of the waterfall, brighten it up, and continue to add to the vast feel of the painting. I'm going to take my smaller round-headed brush. I'm going to dip the tip of it in some water, grab some of our titanium white paint, grab a little bit more water, thin it until it is incredibly thin, much like the moon's glow. I'm going to go down to the base and predominantly to the left-hand corner of the painting, and I'm going to move upwards with this rounded stroke, as you can see here. Now the goal is to have the bottom as the most opaque part of the application, and then as we get higher and higher, it needs to get more and more transparent. And I'm going to add a little bit of a directional stroke into this as well. Right here, I'm just going to try to point it back up here into the painting. That way the eye doesn't go to this bright area of the painting and get lost. Instead, it moves up this way. There we are. And this only works if the base layer is fully dry. If it isn't, this is going to blend and move around your paint. So it's imperative that you do your fog and your mist and all of that at the very end. Hey there, it's Ryan O'Rourke. I truly hope you enjoyed today's little extra video. It was essentially a cut-up version of one of the many hour-long lessons which we offer over on patreon.com. Over there you'll also find digital sketches of the 10-minute painting lessons, digital sketches of these hour-long painting lessons, and a bunch of reference photos as well. So if any of that interests you, or if you just want to support the channel, go over there and check it out. It is a pleasure to make these long form videos, and I love to share them with all of you. So thank you so much for watching. I will see you next Saturday with a new video, and above all, as always, stay creative.